We're here with Dr. Joshua Miller. He's the Inscape Center at Franciscan University for personal vocation. And just wanted to do some follow-up to the show we did. And one, you were just telling me you've given retreats to empty nesters, women that have, the children have left the home, and now they're wondering what's their purpose in life. Right? What do you tell them?
Many of them have been used to thinking about their vocation in terms of being a mother and a spouse. And of course, that's a deeply significant part of their identity. But when the kids are gone and they have so much energy and a desire to serve, a huge question often becomes, what do I do now? How can I serve? What is my calling now? And this is one of the reasons why it's important to cultivate one's unique gifts and unique identity, which informs every state of life. But to be able to help them see that the Lord has given them unique gifts that they need to cultivate and can cultivate to continue serving in the church. So we stress that their vocation is not as important as it is reduced to being a mother or spouse, but that God has uniquely called them by name always. So on that basis, then, we begin to explore how to use those gifts for service.
And does some of that, I see like mothers around here that have adult children, I mean, they're praying like warriors.
Yes,
like they shift to a more contemplative mode, I think, sometimes.
Often, absolutely. Yeah, the prayer warriors of the church are often our mothers.
Yeah. And you've had some, though, like really take on a new direction or go places they never thought they'd be? Or
Yeah. We offer a seminar called Living Your Personal Vocation. And one of the women was in her 50s and had always wanted to write a children's book, but it hadn't had the time or the energy to do that. And so in the seminar, we do look at one's stories and how those stories reveal gifts, those fulfillment stories. And she became convinced, as one of her goals as a result of the seminar, that she should pursue writing a children's story with a Catholic theme. And she went ahead and did that. And then a few months later, she sent a copy of it to one of my colleagues who happily opened it up. And that's one example of a fruit from a seminar that we've led for a woman who had become an empty nester.
what about, like sometimes people, develop a lifetime developing skills and things. And when you haven't done that, how does that factor into everything?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Clearly, having not spent time developing one's skills and gifts is a problem. It's a detriment. Nonetheless, there's still opportunity for service and growth. One of the analogies I like to use, Father Mark, of our following a personal vocation is that we're called to co-create a story or co-create a chapter in God's big grand narrative of salvation history. And if we think of it like a big tapestry, the front side of that tapestry is glorious. It's got lovely threads and pictures, but the back side of it is often a mess of tangled knots. And it's really helpful to talk to people who have made mistakes in life, maybe that have developed their gifts as they wanted to originally. But if they say yes to the Lord, however old they are, and then proceed to serve Him as best they can in the ways that He's given them to do, according to the opportunities He's given to them, that they can see their life as part of that tapestry. It's just that the backside of it maybe was a little naughtier than others. So I think it's a beautiful analogy, and people take to it.
Hmm. And I would think, motherhood, raising kids develops skills.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely.
How would you describe those skills that they're very good at? Like a mother, say like in her 40s and 50s.
Mm-hmm. Well, surely there are some general characteristics. I think mothers generally learn how to manage multiple things. Generally, they learn how to provide an atmosphere of comfort and security. Generally, they're highly relational. But I think it's also important to stress that each unique woman is going to develop that motherhood and express it in her own unique way. And that's one of the messages that I like to stress, is that although there are critical norms that mothers have to follow, right? Some of them feel guilty if they're not conforming to those norms, in the way that they imagine they ought to. And we need to relieve them of that anxiety by letting them know that that they need to pay attention to how God designed them, and then leverage that to be the best moms that they can be.
Right, right. What about the father side of it? I remember talking to I think he worked like in mission advancement type position at Steubenville. I can't remember his name, but he had like 13 kids or something.
Okay, yeah.
A lot of children, and I remember when we spoke to him. He had dinner with us one time. This was years ago, but his oldest was just starting to look at colleges, and so he was driving her to different schools or whatever. And he said he was all excited. I remember asking him a question about it, and he said he feels like he's finally really starting to come into play here. That he was. I thought about. I think there's this guy William Stinson. He writes about like the role of father and stuff, but he said it's like their job to kind of introduce the child to the outside world, to guide them in navigating that, and that's certainly been true in my life. Like older men have helped me to address certain issues or dealing with people issues and all that stuff.
But, I do find in my own life that maybe father because I'm more philosophical, more academic, more interested in rich conversations about the deep things of life. But I find that with my older kids, that I love having those conversations with them, helping to coach them, and to help them navigate. I really do cherish those opportunities, and certainly that's something that a lot of fathers share, and I join in that as well. Yeah.
In your own story, that you're a convert to Catholicism,
I am.
How did that happen?
My parents in the 1980s were very involved in the pro-life movement. And when I went to college, I'd started out at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which is not exactly a paradise of orthodoxy. But the first day I arrived, I saw a pro-life club, University of Wisconsin-Madison Students for Life. And I immediately wanted to get involved with them, and I did. And I met Catholics for the first time who really loved the Lord. And I was moved to the Catholic faith through her teaching about abortion and contraception and the consistent teaching that the Church gives us about the preservation and cherishing of life. So that's where it started. And there were various other paths that I took, or I should say various ways that the Lord called me to Him. But that was the start. It was the pro-life movement in the early 1990s. Yeah.
Was a particular person that helped guide you? And
Monica Migliorino Miller, who was a pro-life warrior, gave me a book by Carl Adams called The Spirit of Catholicism. and she mentored me. I listened to those old Scott Hahn tapes on St. Joseph Communications. I read a lot as well. But I would say a variety of people, but Scott Hahn, Monica Miller. I had a girl that I was dating for a couple weeks who made it very clear that she would not marry anybody who wasn't Catholic, and she was beautiful. So she got me into reading some good books.
But as a philosopher, you would say you were drawn to the beautiful, right?
I was drawn to be exactly. It's exactly that. And the church is full of beauty in so many ways. So those are some of the beginnings. But I find it fascinating because I was always sensitive to the protection of persons. And I find now that part of why personal vocation is so moving to me is that each one matters. And it's consistent with my desire to serve the Lord through the protection of children as well. I always emphasize that we're not just saving human beings here, but every single one matters and needs to be saved.
And why was it so important for your parents that they were involved in that issue?
I think they just saw abortion as murder, rightly so. And
were they deeply religious people?
Yeah, they loved Jesus very much. But I grew up as kind of a roving Protestant gypsy. We just went to different Protestant communions. And but I'm so grateful for them. Art and Carol are their names. Oh. And they taught me to love the Lord.
And what was the pro-life culture like? You went to the D.C. march and things?
I for sure did, yeah.
Yeah. What was it like back then?
I was involved in the rescue movement. And we had an organization called Collegians Activated to Liberate Life, CALL. And so it was wonderful. We organized rescues ourselves. We got on campuses where there was hot opposition to what we were doing. It was an adventure for life. And every time, Father, that we did a prayerful, nonviolent, either prayer outside of an abortion clinic or did a rescue, lives were saved. And a very beautiful memory that I'd like to share is that we did a rescue in northwest Indiana. And about a year later, our organization got a letter from a grandmother which had a picture of a baby. And it was a simple thank you that, thank you all, here's a picture of my grandchild who would have died had you all not been there that day. So just a number of stories of lives actually saved and mothers spared from the horror of abortion. Yeah.
I wonder, sometimes, like early movements, you might have kind of a more John the Baptist figures, that are really...
We had them. Randall Terry was one of them, and he's now Catholic.
Yeah. I remember, I didn't start going to the march when we were in seminary. I was like 1997, 96 or something. But then it just seemed like you had like the Prophet of Doom bus, like a painted school bus with 4-way speakers on top,
Yes.
Yeah.
I've encountered such buses.
And it just seems tamer now, but it's powerful. It's organized. You got talented people and well-spoken people, and just intellectually, more. Just seems like that's a more greater, robust defense. And I think too, like the role of women in that march. It's probably dominated by women, I would think.
And young people.
Yeah.
Yeah, women and young people. It's extraordinary. Going to the march now, the median age is probably about 22.
Right.
And I'm just guessing that. Yeah. But there's so many high school youth. It's a vital movement of young.
Yeah. And it's so critical, I think, in these days of identity politics.
Yeah.
That women are these strong voices of the new feminism that maybe John Paul II talked about.
Yes.
And just absolutely critical. It's almost it's almost like the other side can't argue with it almost.
No.
You know? And I remember at an airport one time, I was talking to this gentleman. I think he was from, well, he was an American. I think he was going to Switzerland or something. And somehow we were eating next to each other, and I remember him telling us somehow the abortion things were really raging in the national news media, and I remember him telling me, well, it's really men that are forcing this pro-life stuff. And he said, I don't really want to talk about it, but he said, he's just kind of saying that's all that it is.
Hmm.
And at the time, I was able to tell him that our woman governor was the one that was approving and promoting like this strong legislation in Alabama, and that, you go to any march, it's just full of women, and it was just so misinformed, and he just, but
Yeah, there are a lot of lies that people believe. I've been involved for years in a crisis pregnancy center, and the women who come, they don't want to abort their babies.
Right.
They almost always feel forced, trapped, and would long for stable, supportive husbands, boyfriends, to families to care for them. They don't want to abort their babies. It's often men who are putting pressure on women to abort.
yeah, or they feel like they have no choice.
Exactly right.
Yeah. Are there some stories that stick out in your mind in your work that were just particularly powerful for you to hear?
As a pro-lifer?
No, just in general in your work.
Yeah.
I'd just say one quick thing. I remember I was sitting in this room. It was some kind of government building, but it was an outreach to the poor, and they had like a poster. It looked like it was right out of the 70s, early 80s. And it was like this grandfather figure sitting on the dock with this young kid with some fishing stuff. And the caption said, "Everyone has a story to tell." And the grandfather was listening to the boy who was talking. And I thought, man, that is so true, that everybody has a story if you just listen, right? Yeah.
So there's several stories, but I would say that, well, here are two, and these are stories of young adults. So, and I'll mention this person's name because he wouldn't mind it and would perhaps appreciate the friendship that it indicates. So there's a fellow named Braden Johnson who I worked with a few years ago. He was a participant in a seminar at Franciscan University of Steubenville called Living Your Personal Vocation. And Braden grew up with a desire to be on stage. So he would do Justin Bieber impersonations at a young age. And he would, sing at the malls and get adulation from that. And his mom had him as a model, and he did those things well as a singer. And he had a really significant conversion in high school, and thought about those desires for the stage and for recognition with a lot of shame. And what he came to in our coaching relationship is that many of his gifts, he's got a lot of gifts, but his gift of public speaking and of motivation and of reading an audience and speaking well to an audience is a gift of the Lord. And that what matters is how we use those gifts. God creates masterpieces, and some of us are going to reflect his gift and drive for inspiring and for shining light. And so Braden had a real pivot where he recognized that his gift for speaking and interest in the response that comes from that is a way that he can be an image bearer. So right now he's a speaker for youth. He does great work and attributes that shift to coaching that we did around personal vocation. So that's one particularly poignant story. There are several others.
Can you want to mention another one?
Yeah, sure. So one of the most powerful works that we do at Inscape is this seminar called Living Your Personal Vocation. And a couple of years ago, we were running this, and I think it was during COVID. And it's done on Zoom, so it's a virtual meeting. And one of the young women was from Minnesota. And as we always do, we say, how do you want to grow during the course of the seminar? Where we teach them about who they are as laypersons. We teach them about the personal vocation and why it's so valuable for the renewal of the church. We have them identify growth goals where they cultivate their unique gifts to meet those goals. But this young woman at the beginning was dating a young man and wasn't sure if she should continue that relationship. But during the course of the seminar, through the teaching, the coaching, the facilitation of group support, at the very end, we were asking participants some of the fruit from the seminar. And this young woman held up her hand, and it had a diamond engagement ring on it. And she said, well, I've discerned that I'm going to get married. I've said yes to my boyfriend, now my fiance, and I invite you all to the wedding. And so having not met everybody in person, the seminar was so moving for her that she was able to move to that particular state of life vocation. Another one that I want to share with you, which is really powerful. We were working with a woman who is deaf, completely deaf. Very powerful, persevering woman. And she is married, raised several children. But one of her unique gifts is to overcome great difficulties. And through the process of the seminar, she came to see that was part of how God motivated and designed her, is to overcome great difficulties and to persevere. And she had a very significant paradigm shift where she realized that she was able to make it as a mother, raise the kids, not because of anger. And she had this idea that she was able to be successful because of anger that emerged from being a deaf woman living in a hard world. But it wasn't really anger that got her through, but rather a gift of perseverance through difficulty. And she had a very significant paradigm shift and was able to see her success in a totally positive light. So this woman went on to become a certified coach and is now working with Inscape and working with young adults to help them understand personal vocation as well. Her name is Andrea.
How could she hear the young adults?
She's able to read lips very well, and also through closed captioned devices.
Zoom. Zoom.
Exactly.
Okay.
So she's quite remarkable in that regard.
And what are some typical principles about cultivating gifts that you have them do?
Yes. On the show earlier, I mentioned fulfillment stories. And this ties in with what you said about...
a story where you felt fulfilled, right?
Yeah, it's simply this. It's a story of some activity that you enjoy doing and believe you do well. What we have people do is go back as early as they can remember to the sandbox, baking pies with grandma, early. And they first of all reflect on those stories. And these could come from any sphere of activity. Maybe it's sports related, it's school related, maybe it's related to church or community friendships, or certainly their work as we get older in life. But they reflect and write about a series of those stories. And then we talk about them. And that in itself, apart from the gifts that are revealed, that by itself is really, really powerful, because most people haven't taken the time, and they've not been asked, or they've not taken the time to reflect deeply on a variety of stories of deep, authentic, personal fulfillment. And what they reveal is a pattern of unique, gifted behavior. So that's where we start. We take them through assessments like M-Code, StrengthsFinder, I mentioned those two, which reveal strengths and underlying motivation within the stories. But the very fact of sharing to a listening, attentive, loving person is by itself really powerful, because it allows them to be affirmed authentically, as opposed to just getting a gold star because everybody else does, right? But we name that pattern of gifts through the stories, and then we concentrate on helping them co-create the next chapters. So we talk about their own story within the grand narrative of salvation history, and that's particularly powerful, because it's not just about them understanding their gifts; it's about them realizing that God wants to use those gifts for salvation history, for the big story.
And do you have like an example of that, like typically, or maybe something you remember of a person being situated in that story that seemed like a very ordinary life?
Certainly. Let me draw attention to some of the work that I've done coaching priests. There's an older priest in the Diocese of Camden, New Jersey, and was a pastor of a parish, doing all the kinds of things that our pastors do. And they're responsible for so much. So this particular priest had stories that were full of simple relationship building. And from his high school years, from his collegiate years, from seminary years, early priesthood years, so many of his stories were about building relationships with people and creating community. And just spending time getting to know people and enjoying that community and helping them live into it. Well, so much of his work as pastor was related to administrative functions. And what we found over the coaching is that he had lost sight of focusing on visiting people in their homes and building relationships with them. And of course, he felt he had to, do so many of the pastoral administrative responsibilities. So it was a beautiful moment in coaching where he recognized that so much life came from visiting people in their homes and building relationships with them. So what we do in coaching is we have development plans, and we were able to come up with a very specific, SMART goal-oriented development plan that had him building teams of folks who could take over some of the administrative burden, some of the paperwork, some of the things that he could do but just didn't have life from, and return to a basic pastoral approach of relationship building. And it was incredibly life-giving for him, which of course elevated his service in all the other areas as well. So there's a lot of stories like that are important for us to help people pay attention to.
One thing I find with myself too is I journal off and on, not every day.
It's an important practice.
Yeah, maybe we could talk about that in a minute too. But I find for me, it's like when I talk about maybe something going on or some issue I'm struggling with, I'll talk to a friend. I find myself almost like what I'm saying, I just kind of lead myself to what I need to do.
Yes.
And it's almost like just talking
Yes.
about it, the story comes out
It's
maybe.
so true. It's so true.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. That's very, very true. So in coaching, you know, we don't tell, we don't advise, but we do draw out. And so often it happens like you've described, Father Mark, where people will speak and process. And when they're doing that to a really interested, empathic person, in this case a coach, people will resolve their own
yeah.
issues,
I
come
guess
to
that's
clarity.
called like external processes, right?
Yeah.
And what would the internal processor look like? Is that more the journaling type, you think? Or
Well, I think in a coach context, sometimes they have to speak it out, but also just creating space for the internal processor to think it through.
yeah.
But I entirely agree that journaling is a significant way that people will work through issues.
Well, that
I
space,
highly recommend it.
and that space might be right, taking a walk outside
Yes.
or something. Of all things, I just read this little blurb of Miley Cyrus. I think she did these TikTok videos, and I just paraphrasing what I got from it was that she was taking a break from performance because I think she felt like it took her out of her true self so much that you're having to perform. You're having to go on stage and do who knows what, you know? But also, I mean, you're presenting whatever, you know, and it's like, and she said she really longed to like take a walk with her friends and just to kind of get rooted back in herself. And because she really said she wanted to do more songwriting and the performance. And I kind of knew what she meant in a sense, like when my experience is like I'm preaching or you're doing like television work. I don't know what it is, but there is, I guess it is kind of a performance mode. I don't know if I'm not looking at it right or something, but there's that element of performance and I don't know, sometimes you wind up feeling a little alienated or disconnected.
From one's own self.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think that there's the wonderful Benedictine phrase of recollection, this idea of recollection, where we have to collect ourselves and possess ourselves. And when we're living these frenetic, fast-paced lives, I can imagine someone like, you know, highly paid, highly sought-after celebrity who's just always on. There's a lot of pressure that they could lose a sense of selfhood. We all have to have space for reflection, introverts as well as extroverts, and to recollect ourselves. And if we don't do that well, we can't give of ourselves effectively. I find for my own self that if I'm too much in teaching mode about the same sorts of things, and I'm not able to take time for, of course, for prayer, but for study, that I tend to dissipate myself and get dry, and I very much need that time for recollection.
Yeah, I heard somebody else say this the other day too, like to getting back to themselves kind of thing is one thing they like to do is cooking or something. And I'm certainly not a cook, but sometimes like just making a cup of coffee, like a pour over cup of coffee, it just takes a little more time and it tastes a little better, you know.
Yeah, it sure does.
Or just, you know, like making some toast with avocado, you know, just like instead of just like taking cereal, throw it in a bowl of milk and gobble it down, you know, there's a little bit of work or even like say, okay, what does this need, or does it need to do this longer or that long? You know, it just it applies a little bit more of yourself into it.
Yeah, that's true. The creative process.
Yeah.
My wife and I will be in the kitchen together sometimes, and I always enjoy having the rhythm of cooking a meal together to be a good space for conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
Like classical music too does
Yes.
that. I don't know what it is. I mean, there's some beautiful music out there, but I listened to maybe even some like Andrea Bocelli stuff. He's singing this Italian love song, and it's thunderous, and it's like only the Italian language is the only way to present whatever they're saying, and it's moving. But I don't know what it is about classical music that it just has a way of like giving you some peace. And, it's not like stimulating on a surface level. It's like it's kind of enriching on a deeper level or something.
I experienced that also.
Yeah.
I think it does appeal to contemplative wonder and that part of who we are, unlike like a heavy rock music or reggae, that it appeals more to the gut and more to more of a visceral part of who we are.
Yeah.
And there's goodness there, of course. But I think the best classical music, it elevates our hearts and our minds in a kind of wonder. And that's very enriching and necessary.
Yeah, I think about like preaching or even like storytelling or movies, I would imagine that, you always hear, nobody complains that a homily was too short, It's like, I mean, one time, I think it was on the air, I went like, I think I went over 20 minutes and I just thought, oh, this is crazy, who's listening to 20 minutes? But I've come, and I haven't by any chance mastered this, but there is something to be said about the beauty of the logic of it, of the presentation, and even like the conciseness of it. Because actually I was watching this great story. It was about John Adams.
Oh,
Did
I
you
love
see
John
that?
Adams.
Yeah, it was like
the David McCullough series.
It's like 6 parts. I think it was HBO put it
Yes.
together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's the was Paul Gianamore.
Yes.
The actor. Yeah, he's great.
And I find him a lot of fun. He reminds me of Richard Dreyfuss. He's just.
I love him.
Yeah. He's not a comedy guy so much, but he gives some speeches in there that are just so powerful.
Yes, that's right.
And I was so struck by it because I went back and thought about it. It was so brief. It was so short. He was making his case in court or whatever. I mean, if you just sat down and looked at it, it was brief, yet it was like so striking and powerful that that's a big element to, like, if you're wanting to convey these things to other people, to have it in a beautiful. I think like Bishop Barron, he preaches, he draws in literature and everything, that is just so compelling. But anyway, I think along classical music, I think its beauty there is so convicting.
Yes, it is.
And like in storytelling or preaching or whatever, you can have that element too. But let's talk about journaling a second.
Yes.
How do you instruct people about how to journal?
Well, I use it in specific ways when I'm teaching philosophy of the human person. And I also use it as a way to help people understand their unique gifts and then move forward in developing those gifts. So as opposed to general journaling, it's normally in those couple of areas. But one of the quotes I'll often use is from Romano Guardini. And he says this, the memory is the power with which a man summons his interior world for inspection, thus for the first time really possessing himself of it. And I think there's a lot of pressure on us in our digital culture to move rapidly on from thing to thing to thing. And so journaling is a way of remembering, taking stock, and adding thickness to our memory. And when we can deepen our memory, then we can more fully possess ourselves. So I think, in general, I think that journaling that aids the memory is really significant. But it can also, and this references the journaling around fulfillment stories and their implications, it can also awaken people to how God crafted them to be, and also some of the trajectory of their lives. So it's a way of tracking some of the plot lines of their own life story, and where they've come from, where they're going. I also think journaling with regard to an examination of conscience, where there's a particular issue that one might be dealing with or virtue that they want to gain. Journaling about success in that is super helpful. Or how to learn from mistakes as well. So those are a few areas that have
So you could just have them like right upon an event that you did feel like you were getting traction or flourishing or whatever, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
One of the things that I do, which I love, the best assignment that I've ever given in a philosophy class, one of the best ones, is I have them go back to their fulfillment stories and identify a person, or two or three, but identify a person who was instrumental in their own success. Then they write a letter of gratitude to that person. And I say, you've got to read it out loud to that person. And then what they reflect upon for the journal that I give is, what was the impact of reading that gratitude letter out loud to the person who received it and to your relationship with him or her? And some of the most powerful journals that I've gotten are in response to that prompt.
And say the prompt one more time.
It comes from the positive psychologists. Martin Seligman writes about this in his book, Flourish, but others from the positive psychology movement have done research in this. But they have to identify somebody who was a critical part of their success, write a letter of gratitude to that person, and then, if possible, read it out loud in the presence of the other. And then they reflect upon the impact of that, of reading the gratitude letter out loud. It's quite remarkable.
Yeah.
Some of them share going to a parent that they'd not properly thanked, or a coach, and the expression of gratitude and delight on behalf of the one thanked. One mother spoke about healing, that it was very healing for her son to thank her in the way that he had. So
Healing for her.
Healing for her, yes. And I don't know all the issues, but it may have been something like the son was hard to raise, and had led to some little bit of resentment on the mother's part, or just some struggle, and that her son acknowledged it.
Yeah.
And not just quick thanks, Mom, but in a reflective way.
Right.
That was part of the healing.
And what about the points, like maybe if we're saying that, reading that letter to somebody or anything, like the points where we are moved, like maybe there's some scene in a movie that moves us. What do you call those points? What do you do with those points? What's going on? Sometimes I wonder if it's just unprocessed trauma that we have.
Yeah, I'm sure sometimes it is.
But maybe there's other stuff that's quote unquote more legitimate. I don't know, but
one of the books that we read is by Father Jacques Philippe. The title is Called to Life, and he and others in our spiritual tradition, our Catholic tradition, have noted this. But he speaks about God's call beginning at creation, but taking place through happy events and sorrowful events, and those things that just come into our imagination. that every aspect of life can be, in one sense, interpreted as a call. So if we think about calling that way, that it's a constant reality. The Lord's always calling us, and we think about those moments of a film or something that we just notice, kind of capturing our attention. I think that we can interpret them as a kind of call. It's not as if God's telling us, go do that. But if God allows it to capture our attention, then we have to deal with it in some way. And so it's an invitation to respond minimally. And I think that when we think about every fiber of life that way, every happening as God either directly causing to happen or allowing to happen, and therefore being part of how he's calling us, that what you described is a dimension of a call. When we live life that way, it is so rich and full of adventure and dignity.
And as part of that, like carrying that call is maybe reflecting on why am I moved at this point?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Why am I moved? How ought I respond to this? What's going on interiorly?
Yeah.
What might the Lord have for me?
That sounds very Hildebrandtian.
Yes.
That ought to respond.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
What's response to value? Is that what he would write?
Yes,
about?
exactly. Response to value. What's being asked of me?
I remember years ago I was in college and watching this Woody Allen movie. I think it was called Another Woman, and Gene Hackman was in it. He had like this side role, and I never got him. I always thought, I don't know, he never really appealed to me. But he was in love with this woman, and they weren't married. It was adulterous, of course. Woody Allen, adulterous relationship.
Sure, you're right.
But I remember it was like Central Park or something, underneath a bridge or something, and he makes this profession of love to her. He imagine like tough guy Gene Hackman, Marine,
Mm-hmm.
and it was so non-stereotypical. I mean, it was just, I forgot, he did some simple gesture in it that was like, holy cow. It's like all of a sudden it hit me like maybe something like what acting is and what a profession of love, sincerity, and it didn't have to be like the big rom-com kind of overdone thing.
Sure.
You know, it could be done in this a tough guy kind of way, I guess. But but I learned later, I was reading about him, like I think it was Reader's Digest when I was a kid, and his father had left like without announcing. He was just like leaving the family, and he was out in a neighbor's yard playing, and the father drove by and he did just this little wave to him. And Hackman never forgot that wave, that gesture. It's so impressed upon him that, I don't know, it's like it made him really attune, I think, in his acting to his gestures and things like that. But anyway, I think sometimes I guess I'm bringing all this up too because I don't know why that struck me in that movie so much. And I heard somebody else commented on it too that impressed them. But the other thing, like we've been talking, like these last shows we've been doing with Life on the Rock, just about encounter.
Yeah.
And it's almost like with acting, I know John Paul II was an actor and stuff. I used to always think, man, these scripts are so terrible. If you just write a decent script and a movie, if you have these great speeches in it, like John Adams and stuff or whatever. But, I was just thinking with all this stuff we've talked about, like encountering, it's like the script is almost like giving this space for the encounter with the actor.
Sure. To co-create the film. So there's a script that's given, but he's going to bring his own experiences into that in nuanced ways and make it his own, make it her own. I think it's part of the beauty of acting. It's not just following the script.
Yeah, and it's like that's maybe what makes movies powerful for us. Like we're encountering another person, in a sense, or this character or this humanity that we can relate to. It's like real and visceral. And you need the script, but it's not going anywhere without the actor, right? That make this encounter possible. Right?
Yeah, take it places even that the writer or the director didn't anticipate.
Right.
I think that the best actors do that.
Yeah, there was this other movie that struck me that way. That it was this character that, like 20 something, and like not going really anywhere in her life. She really felt stuck. And our friend leads her to this bridge, and they do this thing called trestling, where it's like this elevated train thing, track.
Mm-hmm.
And so you climb up on the wooden bridge support, and you're like hanging underneath as the train rushes over. I know, it was like, she's flailing in life and looking for some stimulation or something.
Yeah, that's.
But it was such a powerful scene because it was at night, and she said it was almost like this big angry God was just roaring over her life. And so it's at night, the train's coming, the lights come, and she sticks her hand out, through the tracks, and she pulls it back in, but she's holding on as the train's roaring past, and like these sparks from the wheels are flying out, and she's crying out. I mean, it's like all her pain and stuff inside her that's all welled up comes. I showed this movie to other people, and they just kind of yawned. What's the scene there? But
that is the way you're describing it is a very powerful image.
Yeah. It was like, I felt like, because I kind of feel like, who doesn't feel some frustration at times with their relationship with God? It's like, where are you? Why aren't you in
The
this?
Psalms are full of that.
Yeah.
And one reason why I love reading the Psalms and praying with them is because they do range over every human emotion. And the Lord, wants us to express to Him our disappointment when it's authentic, or when we don't understand, or when we're even angry.
Yeah.
And He likes to wrestle with us and have us be authentic with Him.
Yeah.
The Psalms allow that, for sure.
I don't know if you saw, like, Sylvester Stallone met with Pope Francis the other day.
Oh, did he really?
He brought his wife and daughters and his brother with him. And Pope Francis told him something like, "Yeah, I grew up with your movies," or something. And Sylvester says, "You want to box?" He does this kind of little thing. But he was very respectful, very polite, and Pope Francis was clearly enjoying it. But I thought, that's another kind of movie, just the idea of like the guy trying, not giving up.
I remember Rambo when I was in high school.
Yeah.
Not giving up.
Yeah.
Persevering deeply.
Yeah.
And of course the Rocky movies.
Yeah.
Those are unforgettable.
And that story, because that movie, the first Rocky, begins with the scene, like the camera's on the Sacred Heart in that boxing gym.
Is that right?
Yeah, it begins.
Yeah,
it begins on the Sacred Heart.
In Catholic Philadelphia, right?
Yeah. But isn't that, I've heard people say that, that is the drama of story, is, the struggle, the cross, the resurrection.
Every good story's got it.
Yeah. Every
good story's got it. One of the things I've been doing lately is asking people, my students, okay, what does a good story consist of? Mm-hmm. And, well, we don't exactly know the ending. There's mystery. There's some challenge or tension point.
Right.
It's got to be resolved. And so then I ask them to think about their own life as a story and say, well, look, if mystery is a good part of a story and not knowing the end and having struggle to deal with, then why should we be so upset if we don't have everything all figured out?
Right.
Or if there's struggle in life, or there's real pain and difficulty that we can't know now, but we know later gets figured out, because your life is a story. And I think that that's helpful for them, because they know that if they want their life to be a good story, it's got to have those elements that they just said were part of a good story.
Yeah.
We all have struggle to deal with, and it's a part of the sanctifying process, but it's also part of a life well lived, and bearing our cross for other people. participating with Christ's work. We wouldn't do that if we didn't have struggle.
Yeah. And it seemed like today, something that like a lot of modern movies do very well, I think, is like the unexpected or the twist. If it's at all predictable, I know I kind of immediately get bored. You check
of course,
it. Yeah.
right.
Because I guess life is always like unexpected.
Life is unexpected.
And I even thought, you said like the love of a good mystery. It's like, life is a mystery, and how's things going to work out and what's going to happen. And, you're dealing with God, who's an infinite mystery. And, you went to Steubenville to study with Dr. Crosby.
I did.
Yeah. And what drew you to John Paul II and personalism? And
I had mentioned earlier in the podcast here that I was a convert. The work that my grandfather and father did and are doing, my grandfather's passed on, has to do with helping people identify giftedness through this fulfillment story narrative. But when I became Catholic in '94, I thought it was too Protestant, my family's work. It was so very focused upon the self. I thought it lacked a connection with community and the social nature of the church. And so I wanted to do this work because I've always loved helping people realize themselves through story and learning about biography and history and John Adams, right? And other historical figures. But my point is that I wanted to test my grandfather and father's work with the best Catholic anthropology, the best Catholic personalism. And so I had read an article that John Crosby wrote about individuality and selfhood and uniqueness, and wanted to study with him at Franciscan University of Steubenville. And so I was married in 1998, and in 2000 went up to study with Dr. Crosby. And there I learned that this attentiveness to the uniqueness of each person and honoring the dignity of each person, each one having a unique essence, this is very much an emphasis that John Paul had as a philosopher, but also his pastoral vision of the church as being renewed through personal vocation. That deeply, deeply captured me. And I've been trying to understand and promote that vision ever since. So, does that answer the question?
Yeah, and somebody recently said something along these lines, I think too, about John Paul could really present like the mission of the church, like young people at Denver, preach it from the rooftops.
Yes.
And I was even reading quotes where his idea behind World Youth Day was that youth could especially evangelize youth.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But you give them this mission, and he was so powerful in that. I mean, just like with the Polish people, I went to Poland this past October and just learning a little bit more about the history and what they've endured and persevered through. It's like, it's unbelievable.
I know, it's incredible. Have you seen the work that Newt Gingrich did with his wife around 9 Days That Saved the World?
Yeah.
That's a remarkable story of his stirring up the hearts of the Polish people to their freedom and dignity as persons.
Right.
Yeah.
I went to Victory Square in Warsaw, where like his first visit back.
In Victory Square, right?
Yeah, he had that mass.
1979, right?
I think it's 9, yeah. And it was a vigil of the Pentecost. They wouldn't let him offer mass on Pentecost. They thought it would be too powerful. They tried to
tamp it down. I know.
Yeah, tamp everything down the whole trip.
Didn't work.
They gave the vigil. I don't know if they do that. Catholics have vigil masses, but he called down the Holy Spirit upon this earth to let it renew the face of the earth.
He did.
This earth.
So
this
powerful.
earth. And today they've got this big concrete cross where the altar was in the square, and they've got that quote on the I was with a Polish guy who could translate it for me, but the quote's there.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just so powerful to think about what happened there that, eventually a couple of years later, the Solidarity movement
Mm-hmm.
and leading to the overturning of running the Soviet rule out. And
It's a remarkable story. Pope John Paul II is one of my patrons and favorites. He's such a saint for our time for so many reasons. His being able to see Jesus in each person, but also speak to large crowds and stir up large crowds. I was in Denver as a Protestant.
Oh, were you?
And I remember his voice so distinctly it causes bumps on my arms.
Yeah.
When he flew into the stadium there, and the young people were
Mile High
Stadium. Yeah, they were calling out, "John Paul II, we love you, we love you."
Yeah.
He said in his voice, John Paul II, he loves you. But just that there was even though it was to the crowd, there was a sense that it was for me. Mm-hmm. And I think each person felt that. The love was so powerful that we felt it for each one of ourselves.
Yeah.
Very stirring.
Yeah, I watched it on television. I didn't realize I was just having this kind of conversion experience. I didn't realize the significance of it, but I still had a powerful experience through watching it. I was watching it on EWTN. I wasn't in the community, but when he was at Cherry Creek State Park, it was really, and he had this incredible memory that he would remember
of persons.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
of all things, but. One of the stories that I share, it comes from Chris Stefanik, who shared it, but this Bishop Robert Brahm, when Brahm was a seminarian, he was in Rome in 1964, and he was walking into the Church of the Jesu, and Karol Wojtyła, as an auxiliary bishop, was walking out. They had a little exchange, and Wojtyła went his way and Brahm went his, and then years later he was named bishop in 1983. He goes right before John Paul II. And John Paul says, "I know you. We've met before." And Brahm says, No, fully thought we'd never met. But a couple of days later, Stanislaus Dziwisz, the Pope's secretary, came to Brahm and said, 1964, outside the Church of the Jesu, you met the Pope. Don't argue with the Pope. and then Brahm says, how does he do that? And Dziwisz apparently said, well, when he meets a person, he never forgets them because he sees the face of Jesus in a unique way.
Yeah. So, what are some of the other things about him that has inspired you, John Paul?
I think his delight in the human person, in whatever culture or language, and his desire for people to be fully alive in the full truth of who they are, in a way that's not only conformity to the universal mandates of the church, but also alive in their own culture and language. And that I find so stirring and moving as well. His tenderness for such a diversity of people, I find so moving. And also this, Father, that he cultivated deeply his own unique gifts in his pontificate. I mean, how many popes have been actors?
Right.
But he was an actor. He loved language. He loved poetry. And he brought all of that to the office of the papacy.
Right.
He knew how to hold a stage, right? Yeah. The world stage. Yeah. And so those are some of the things that I find so moving. But back to personal vocation, he says in so many of his documents that this attentiveness to the one. He says in his very first encyclical that man is the primary and fundamental way of the church. Each unique and unrepeatable person is the primary and fundamental way of the church. And so this message that we have to create a culture that's ordered towards the flourishing of each one for the body, for the sake of the body, I think it's a message that is desperately needed, and he was the main driver of that message.
Yeah. And his experience in Poland, where they were, I mean, he describes it as humiliations, right?
Yes, of the Polish people,
yeah.
right.
So I guess he had a deep sense of what it means to have to overcome that, I guess.
And to co-suffer with his people. Yeah, for sure. But this diversity of experience, right? He was worked in as a how did he work? Weigel talks about this. Limestone, like a limestone quarry. Yeah, working in quarries, but being in solidarity with skilled tradesmen and manual workers, and being able to reference that experience, co-suffering with us in so many ways. He did that as a Polishman.
And I was surprised. I was reading George Weigel's book that he wrote. I don't have all his titles, but he wrote about writing Witness to Hope and his friendship with John Paul.
Yes, he did, yeah.
And I found it moving to describe the affection of John Paul. Like he'd give him like this big, strong hug, a long hug, or you could tell he just had this. It didn't seem like it was super expressive, like what he said, but it was clear that, man, he felt this bond of friendship, man, and it meant something to John Paul. I guess when you're his friend, it's like it was powerful.
I remember George Weigel talking about that, and clearly he was so personally moved.
And then the other thing that John Paul always was quoting too is that Vatican II has it in there about that sincere giving of ourselves.
Yes.
Right? Talk about that.
Yes, exactly. That we don't know ourselves until we give of ourselves, and Jesus' self-gift is model for us. That we find ourselves in self-gift. I have often quoted that phrase and point to it in our work with personal vocation. That we're only going to realize our own full identity when we give of ourselves. But to do that well means that we have to understand and possess ourselves. And so it's not wild subjectivism to have a deep, deep cultivation of one's own unique selfhood. Because when we do that well, then we can give ourselves more fully. And John Paul was very attentive to that dynamic. That strong self-gift implies strong self-possession and freedom.
Yeah, I know. Like in the priesthood, they would warn you. I'm my spiritual director, that the priest could feed off the people. It's like maybe the adulation and stuff he's getting back. He's losing sight of he's giving to them, right?
Yes.
That taking, and that word sincere. You only find yourself through a sincere giving of yourself. What's the importance of that word? It seemed like an unusual word to put there. A sincere giving of yourself.
I think it implies a humble acceptance of one's place in the world, and again a depth of gift. Because if we're just showing up and living on the surface of things and going with the flow of, let's say, a community is about hospitality, and we jump into the community and we do the community things that we need to be done. But if that's not very intentional and done from a place of decided responsibility, then I think it lacks sincerity and depth. So I equate that sincerity with interior depth.
Yeah. Or even that phrase too, like disinterested love.
Yes, yes.
I'm not interested like what I get back all the time, Maybe just close with this. What are some of the books that you recommend along these themes that have helped you in your work of
Yeah.
your work?
The journalist Russell Shaw, who's still writing prolifically in his 80s, he has written several books about personal vocation. One of them with Germaine Grisey, who's passed along, called Personal Vocation, God Calls Everyone by Name. That's an important book. Father Herbert Alfonso, Jesuit, he interprets the Ignatian spiritual exercises in terms of personal vocation. That basically the election from St. Ignatius is about identifying one's calling, unique calling, and orienting oneself toward it. So that book is great. Discovering Personal Vocation, I think it's called, Father Herbert Alfonso. Father Jacques Philippe writes beautifully about calling in Called to Life. I wrote a book as well with Luke Burgess. We co-authored it, called Unrepeatable, Cultivating the Unique Calling of Every Person. And of course, I recommend that. So those are 4 texts. I also think in terms of church teaching that a critical text is Christa Fidelis Laici on the vocation and mission of the lay faithful. And that was done in 1988, I believe. But it contains definitive church teaching on the priority of personal vocation. In paragraph 58, John Paul says that the fundamental objective of the formation of the lay faithful is an ever clear awareness of one's vocation. And then a line later, he says, this personal vocation and mission defines the dignity and responsibility of every member of the church. So that's a critical document on vocation. Also, his first encyclical letter, Christ the Redeemer of Man, where he defines personal vocation. And he says, every initiative, this is a paraphrase, but he says, every initiative in the church, if it's going to lead to true renewal, has got to take into consideration the unique and unrepeatable vocation that each Christian has for the building up of the body of Christ. So I draw reference to that because it connects our renewal efforts with personal vocation. Also, another book is by Romano Guardini called The Meaning of the Church. And there he writes beautifully about how when the church is always attentive to each person, each member, and in turn, each member has to come into their own unique self for the sake of the church. So this dynamic of the whole within the whole is something that he says is what the meaning of the church is all about. So I highly recommend that text as well by Guardini.
Did Grisey, was the catechism presented in? I seem like I remember him making a criticism of the catechism.
Yes, he does.
What is that criticism about?
Well, he says that there's clear teaching about personal vocation that was, anchored in Vatican II, in Lumen Gentium on the Document of the Laity, and in Gaudium et Spes, the Church in the Modern World, and clearly developed by John Paul II in magisterial documents, like the ones that I referenced. But personal vocation is not explicitly mentioned in the Catechism. Now, Dr. Petrock Willie, who's a wonderful catechist, he takes some issue with that. I forget the paragraph reference, but there are references in the Catechism around the importance of identifying one's own mission in the church, for sure. But Grisey laments that there's not more on personal vocation. His moral theology is ordered around personal vocation in the way of the Lord Jesus. So that would be another text, which is so critical.
And that's a lot of cases, right, that are presented. So that usually doesn't go with personal vocation, does it? Or does it? I don't.
Well, he has a lot of cases there in terms
Yeah.
of appropriate Catholic moral theology.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of one's response to living life fully, obeying the universal moral norms of the church,
Right.
but also identifying one's particular call. He says it's to do that well, you've got to recognize and live your personal vocation.
Yeah.
As our unique way of responding to the universal call to holiness.
Right.
So it's a guiding theme
Yeah.
in this book.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure talking with you.
Thanks, Father Mark.
Joshua.
It's been great to talk to you.